So hi everyone, I'm Tom Wild from ProWritingAid. Thank you for joining us for yet another session in the ProWritingAid Ask a Book Doctor series. My guest, as always for these sessions, is our resident book doctor, Sally OJ. How are you doing, Sally?
I'm doing pretty good this rainy evening here in Brighton.
It is, isn't it? I was looking back at some of our earlier ones, thinking of the light and the heat we were sitting in doing the earlier webinars earlier in the year. But yeah, winter is truly upon us here in the UK. Sally, tonight we are talking about description. So let's kick off with an opening question. Why is description so important? In fact, how important is good description?
Well, that's a very leading question. It depends a lot on the genre, but if you're writing literary fiction, or if you're writing historical fiction or fantasy, or pretty much every genre really, description is incredibly important, because as you know, and as everyone here tonight will know, the key for a reader to get really drawn into a novel is for them to lose themselves in the world that the author is creating. And then to do that, they must be able to picture everything as they read it, not only to see things, but even to sort of smell and taste things. This is the thing, a lot of people, when they think about description, they think about visually, and people often nail that pretty well. You know, I was walking along the road and I saw a dog, and you know, the trees were green and the sky was blue. A little bit better than that if possible. But people forget that there are 5 senses, and if you keep mentioning, you know, if you walk into a house, you can smell the musty carpet, perhaps it smells of dog, perhaps, you know, the light is coming through the curtain in a particular way, perhaps the armchair, you know, the cover on the armchair is a bit rough as you sit down. Now, of course, you can't shovel that into one paragraph or one page even, but if you drop little bits of this sensory information in here and there, you're building up a strong picture for the reader, and they're there in the world with you. And it's very important. Otherwise, when we were talking about characterization last time, we were saying we don't want stick figures walking through your book. And likewise, we don't want very well drawn characters walking through a sort of black and white line drawing. We want them, you know, we want the world that they are inhabiting to be rich and vivid also.
Yeah, okay. So I get that, very much about the 5 senses. What are the common mistakes? So when you're working with a new author, firstly, how highly does description rank, if you see what I mean, in the list of things that you have to work on?
It's up there in the top 5 without any doubt, probably the top 3. It depends on, you know, how good the writing is generally. There are 2 main mistakes that people make. One is to not do enough description. People are scared of being florid. People are scared of purple prose. So they really pull themselves back. And that is really common for new authors. So often all I have to do quite often is give someone permission to put description in. And what I always say is, look, just shove it all in and we can always cut it. We can always take it out again if it's too much. But there is this real fear often of letting yourself go and letting it sort of flow out in a natural way. And the other thing is the other end of the spectrum, where people feel they've picked up somewhere along the line that they need to get lots of description in, and it becomes, you know, almost comical, a lot of alliteration, almost. So, you know, the flourishing, fabulous, furry fish, you know, whatever, you know. It's way too many adjectives, and way too many things that are crammed into one paragraph or into one page. But you know, that's also easy to pull back, to rein back, because often within that there's some absolutely excellent description. So it's just a case of toning it down.
I think that's the thing that interests me about this. There is a craft to it, right? It's very easy to think, well, I can describe things, but actually there is a craft. And as any as an avid reader, I really appreciate the craft I love being transported, and you mentioned about those 5 senses. I can completely relate to that. It'd be interesting to know how so any listeners tonight who have struggled with description, have kind of maybe started off by not being descriptive in their works, or vice versa. It'd be interesting to hear from you.
Sorry, carry on.
No, that's okay. So what are the, all right, you've talked us through the common mistakes. How do you guide people? You know, is it just a case, I talk about this every time, I think every month we talk about putting yourself in the reader's shoes. Is this partly about, you know, if you're writing and you've created the scene in your own mind, and you can very easily be fooled into thinking that your reader will feel the same way, but that's not the case, right? You have to, that can be hard work.
Getting the balance right. You know, partly, you know, it's in the language you use, of course, that comes back to it, because you can say, you know, it was raining, or you could say, you know, the first thing he saw when he woke up that morning was the splatters of rain against the window pane. You know, it's not great art necessarily, but it's a bit more vivid, it's a bit more real. It pulls us into that room with him. You know what that sounds like, you know what that looks like. But again, of course, you can't do this, you know, he'd never get down to breakfast if you were describing everything in there. So you pick every paragraph, every page, every chapter, you pick the moments to bring us back in with a bit of sensory description, bring us back into the world. And it's to do with thinking of your reader, absolutely always. I'll say that whatever the subject is, I'll say you must think of your reader, but it's also to do with putting yourself in the scene with your characters. And I think I've used this example before in one of our discussions, but when I've worked with an author who actually found a Victorian door with a Victorian keyhole to look through, because she wanted to know what you could see if you look through a Victorian keyhole. So if you've got somebody waking up in the morning, lie on your bed, I'm not kidding here, lie on your bed, look around the room, what do you see? You know, you see the ceiling, you see perhaps the shadows coming into the room. Now, again, of course, I'm not suggesting you do that with every single moment of the book, but if you're having a bit of trouble with finding description in a passage, or if you can't literally do it, you know, you can't be on the deck of a pirate ship, but put yourself as best you can onto the deck of that pirate ship. Put yourself there, imagine, you know, the rock of the boat, imagine the taste of the salt on your lips, imagine your hair sort of flying, you know, do your absolute best to get yourself in that moment, and it will absolutely pay dividends. It's no good saying, you know, I was on the pirate deck, I was on the deck of the ship and it was rolling. Yeah. I mean, of course that's fine. Of course that's, you know, that is fine. But it's much, much more immersive if you can give us a bit of the taste of salt on the lips. That's, you know, that's what we're looking for.
And so with your work, particularly as a book doctor, do you find yourself, when you have a manuscript that you're working on for a writer, for an author, do you find yourself doing that kind of, not that level of research, but you must be doing a lot of desk research too, to verify descriptions that are being used, and as well as facts, right?
Do, especially with historical novels, yes. I spent most of one day finding out when carrots were first grown in domestically, and what colour they were, because, you know, carrots were purple before, they were only orange after William of Orange came into this country.
I never knew that. I knew you could get purple carrots. I didn't know the purple carrots came first. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing I can spend a lot of time on, checking. That's part of my job, is to check facts, check anachronisms, but that's fun. It's part of my job I love.
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of things. We talked about description earlier in the week when we were, you know, talking about this webinar. And you gave a really good example, which is about, I think, a book that you've been working on, and it's set overseas, set in Sri Lanka or somewhere. I can't remember exactly where, but you were talking about the fact that it's, you know, not just, it's important no matter where the book's set. You know, it might be a wet suburb of Doncaster. I know one of our listeners from Doncaster tonight. And equally, you can use all 5 senses again as just as much in that situation as you could in somewhere where the you know, where there's very different. And
if you've got what, to put it very crudely, an agent might think of as an exotic location, a lot of the work is done for you if you go that way. So if you are in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was called in this book that I was working on, you know, you've got the smell, the bright colors, you've got the you know, very blue sky, the very lush greenery, you've got the smell of the spices, you've got, you know, the bright clothes, you've got all those things. But you have to bear in mind that if you have written a book that takes place in Ceylon, Japan, Spain, Texas, people are going to want Texas. You know, that, you know, they don't want to think they're in Doncaster if they're in Texas. So you've got to give those locations their due. But if it is in a rainy suburb of Doncaster, that can be just as vivid. That can be just as interesting and exciting, actually, if you do it properly.
Yeah.
That if you set a book, or in, you know, with an historical novel, if you are, you know, walking down the streets of Piccadilly in 1842, that I mean, it's more obvious then, isn't it, that you need to bring the description, but you must think of it, even in your Doncaster suburbs, you must think of it. I don't know, it's like, why not in your Doncaster suburbs? Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we've had a question, actually, and this links to what I was about to ask, which is about how do we know when description is dragging the story's pace or when it's the right level of description. And that, it reminds me of some of the things I've been reading about description, about where, you know, how you should, you don't want it to be lumpy, right? You want it to be...
You want it to be nice and smooth.
Yeah. So how do you tell when it's negatively affecting the story's pace, or is it just something that you have a keen eye for, or is it, you know?
I mean, this is one of the reasons it's always good to you know, have somebody else read your work. But if you're doing it yourself, this is another place where reading out loud really helps, because if you're reading a page out loud to yourself and you realize that you're still talking about, you know, the color of the wallpaper, and you're halfway down the page, you will hear it more. It's very good to give us the color of the wallpaper. If it becomes florid, if somebody's tipped a bucket of adjectives over the page, then that's a good sign that you can probably rein it back a bit. If you are, funnily enough, if you are alliterating too much, and it's a thing that people do somehow slip into doing, not fabulous furry fish, but it is something that people slide into doing when they're quite new with description, is they tend to alliterate quite a lot. So look out for things like that. But reading aloud, again, whatever our subject is, I'm going to tell you, read aloud. Yeah. That's the best way to hear your own work and to see what you're doing. And, you know, the other thing I always talk about is this chime of a crystal glass. You know, if it's chiming, it's good. If you're getting this in your heart, in your stomach, if you're hearing this noise, and all the writers here will know that sensation of just knowing it's not quite right, then you've got to keep going back to polish.
Yeah, and there are some comments that back that up. Certainly, I think Irene and Liz and Barb have all talked about. Irene mentions, so glad that we talk about the fear of description. And Liz is saying it's something I'm working on. Barbara said it's in my first novel, and my critiques are always about adding more description, which is, so it's good to hear that it's kind of chiming with many of our listeners, viewers, listeners, not sure what to use there. Now, before we go on, so Mary asks, physical description is one type of description, but can you discuss emotional description as
Absolutely. And that's really, really important. And it's what I'm actually going to do that in a separate session. It doesn't mean I won't talk about it now. I'm happy to, but it's so important. We're giving us a session to it. Emotional description is absolutely vital, obviously. Otherwise we're not. But again, you have to have a. It's not exactly a light touch. Again, it's walking this tightrope, and I think the only way to really get it is to practice and to. So, can you ask her what particular thing she's? Sorry, can you ask her?
Yeah, sorry, Mary, tell her.
What are you particularly asking here?
Well, let's wait for an answer from Mary, see if there's something specific there. And while we're doing that, we'll go on to Shirley's question, which is, when we add tiny details such as weather, feelings of the character, descriptions of the setting, the mood, etc. But then the next day, scene, surely you don't repeat a similar kind of description, should you?
No, this is what I'm saying. So well, with each page, with each paragraph, with each chapter, you've got to pick. It's like I said before. You want these little moments throughout that just sensory things that just bring the reader into the story. So in one chapter he'll wake up and it'll be raining, and that'll be the thing. In the next chapter it'll be the smell of chips when he goes into a cafe. In the next chapter it'll be, you know, the sound of a horse going along the pavement outside. So you just pick your moments gently, carefully. It's like, I don't know what I said to you the other day, Tom. It's like a condiment. Description is like a condiment. Yes. So you don't want, if you've got a bottle of ketchup, you are not going to just shake it all over your food so it's thick over your food. Description is to bring out the taste of the writing. It's exactly like a condiment. Think of description as ketchup. So if you're using it in that way, you just put a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here to bring out the taste of what you're writing. Think of description as ketchup and you'll be all right.
That's great. Thanks for that, Sal. I think, so we've just had a question from Gary as well, who said, I'm working on a fast-paced action scene. Description seems difficult in this section. Any ideas? And I guess it's part of the issue there that you don't want to you don't want to slow the pace by getting into detailed description. I'm not sure. What do you think, Sal?
Yeah, that is the danger. That is the danger with an action scene, is that you want to keep the pace absolutely snapping along. You want to keep it rolling. You want to keep it chugging along. So you give us, if you think in those terms, you give us short bursts of description like that. So if you're watching a scene like that in a film and you see how it's edited, they snap here like that, they bounce around, and that's kind of what you want to do. So and the trouble with an action scene is it can get very repetitive.
Yeah.
So repetition is one of the things actually that you really have to look out for if you're writing action, because otherwise it's he hit him, he fell over. You know, it's he was shot, the gun shot. You know, it gets very repetitive. So that the skill in an action scene is to not be repetitive and keep things short and sharp usually.
I like so Barb mentions the kick of the gun, the smell of the cordite, and certainly that kick of the gun, yeah, in any of the action books that I've read, and I'm so bad at remembering the names of books or authors. It's those kind of things that have kept me kind of in.
I think what else, if you're doing an action scene, if you can come up with something original. Now, of course, nothing is original, but if you can, you know, and the kick of the gun is excellent, and don't not do the kick of the gun, But if you can do, you know, I mean, if two guys are sort of fighting, you know, one of them can smell, you know, the sort of mustiness of his coat or something like that. I mean, just like that, just really quickly, not in detail, just as it would go through your head if you were wrestling with somebody and you just catch that smell, you know, because it's difficult not to be cliched with scenes like that. And in a way, it doesn't matter if you are, actually. It doesn't matter if you're cliched. But if you can throw a little something that the reader hasn't read before and think, oh, that's good. The other thing, of course, is when we were talking about emotional description before, is that, this is, it folds back into show, don't tell, which we will be talking about again, because the first one, the sound was terrible. So we'll be doing it again. And that's where really we're going to, but we are going to talk about emotional language and stuff, aren't we? In another.
Yeah, we are. That's right. And in fact, back on that question, Mary's got back in touch. So she said, so in writing a memoir, is it often important to reveal? In writing a memoir, it is often important to reveal difficult emotions. The biggest issue I run into is to describe the feelings without going into a morass of emotion, yet at the same time allow the reader into the emotional state of the writer. So I get that. It's a kind of balance, right? It's
and we're back to our ketchup again. It is, you do want to bring them, but it's the difference between saying I was upset and saying, and I'm going to be very cliched here, but with saying, I felt ice water running down my back, or I felt not, my heart sank. But it's the difference between saying something very blandly at that moment, my world changed forever. Well, you can have that, but you've got to get, even if it is well worn, even if it is your palms getting clammy or something, bring us in with a bit of an emotional, physical reaction is always good with emotions.
Yeah, and that just made me think of something I've completely forgotten. What it was anyway.
But you mustn't again use these things lightly, because otherwise you're going to have things. You're going to have things every 2 or 3 times a paragraph if you're not careful. So a light touch is always good.
At this point, it's probably worth mentioning that the thing, this shouldn't get in the way of you completing your first draft, right? You get the first draft done. Don't worry about these things. Get it done, and then you can go back and look at this, review it.
Absolutely. The crucial thing with the first draft is just get it all out there, and it's to use some very vivid physical description. It's basically you're just vomiting it out with the first draft, and you've got to know that. You've got to know that you're doing that, and that it's okay, because it won't be great. It might be great, but it won't be, you'll still need to polish and work on it a lot. And it's certainly good to start off with description. I wouldn't say ignore it in your first draft, but it is something that you can come back with on the second, third draft even, and think, I could add a bit in there. And I'm always saying to the writers I work with, it's a sentence here, a word there. That's what makes a difference. Just a sentence here, just a word there. Vivid, lustrous.
Right.
You've
got fans of the ketchup analogy. Nikki has said, I love ketchup, condiment usage, nice. Right, let's go on to Marv's question. Marv asks, when describing something that needs to be used multiple times, should you try to use alternate synonyms of the word? For example, I'm describing a scene of people walking on the sidewalk. Alternate description might be pedestrians, etc.
Yeah, no, that's very good, because you don't want repetition. So you don't want people, and I'm always urging I'm always urging writers towards You know, if I'm marking up a manuscript, I highlight repetition in blue. And sometimes it's a real shock when you see that just the same word over and over and over again. So yes, definitely. What you mustn't do is sort of bend over backwards to do that. So you mustn't do, you know, sort of duopeds, or you know, you keep it real. But definitely mix it up. Yes, definitely. Can I just say, I know this sounds really silly. The ketchup thing, I just did think of that the other day. So you're not going to find that in any book or anything. That was just me. Not the most refined analogy you'll ever come across, but I think
we'll work it up into something though, Sal. It'll become a well-known process before you know. I love the fact that, and Sal, you're not allowed to look at the chat because you're focusing on answering questions, but I love the fact that we've got a whole kind of beta reading session going on in chat with people helping with, you know, to kind of edit sentences. It's brilliant.
Fantastic. That's, you want somebody, another pair of eyes.
Yeah. And in fact, Nikki, so one of the points, Nikki, I've just picked up your point, is my story set in China has a climatic train rescue. Difficult to limit the amount of time and sensory details when in the Gobi Desert, between fantastic scene setups and emotions, but use a lighter touch.
Well, what I'm saying is, if it's your first draft, don't limit it. Just get it all out there. Have a huge Ben-Hur chariot race of description. Just go for it. And in your second draft, you will have to cut it probably, but you will be able to do that. Sometimes it's difficult because you write something and you read it back and you think, oh, that's jolly good. Yeah, that's really very good. And then you have to murder your darlings. You've all heard of that expression. So, but certainly when you're initially writing it, just get it all down, really seriously, because there will be some great stuff in there. So then you just, you know, winnow out the chaff.
So this is an interesting one, Sal. One of our listeners tonight has said, would this apply equally as well to academic writing, such as a thesis? Now,
no,
I'm not qualified. I can't imagine it would, but I think it's, I mean, going back to your point about genres, right? This is really, we're talking historical fiction.
Well, certainly literary fiction, historical fantasy. There are very few genres actually that don't require description, and academic is one of them. Now, as much as I would love, personally, I would love to see academic writing full of vivid description, I don't think it is certainly not the accepted way of doing it, and you'll get not in trouble, but it's not what people are looking for, unfortunately, with academic writing. But no, you have to rein it in there. Very dry as a bone.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. Shirley's come back with a question to say, I've describing mood in historical fiction in 1910s, so the early 1900s in the UK. I described a mood of despondency as a vulture poised, ready to pounce, and someone said not to use a vulture as it wouldn't be appropriate to the setting.
Exactly. I was just going to say, that's exactly what I was going to say. You've got, if you're going off in a slight tangent now, if you're writing historical fiction, you've got to remember their world. Now, of course, if somebody's in the, or just been in the Boer War, they might well think of something as a vulture. You know, if they've seen that in South Africa, then they might well think. But if they're walking down the high street in Putney, no vulture. So it's think of what is apt. Think of what fits. So yes, if you know somebody who's a sailor might have seen all sorts of things. Won't have been out in the desert necessarily, but I mean, it's a very good description, but it's got to fit what you're writing about.
Relevant, yeah. Okay, I'm going to keep going with questions, Sal, because we've got quite a few coming in. So next, and forgive me, I don't know your name, but metaphor is a great descriptor. Are there any tips to execute metaphor without sounding childish?
A metaphor is something else that people are scared of. Do you mean metaphor or do you mean simile? Can I just ask? So simile is, you know, shone like a sparkling drop of water on the, you know, metaphor is when you use something to illustrate a point.
Yeah.
In the point. So they are two different things. I'm gonna
I think it's simile.
Yeah, and think you mean simile. So yes, simile is a wonderful thing to use, but you have to pull it off. So I know this sounds really ridiculous, but unless it comes absolutely naturally to you, into many writers it does, practice writing some similes, because writing is a skill. It's a craft like any other craft. And you never stop learning, and you never stop building a talent, and you never stop learning things. And if similes don't come naturally to you, and I'm always urging people to use them, try a few out. And also, when you read your favorite books, notice how people use similes. Notice how smoothly they slide in there. These are certainly something else you need to use sparingly. And when I say sparingly, I mean sort of once or twice a page. I don't mean, you know, once in a chapter.
Yeah.
You know, it's certainly something you have to use quite sparingly. But yes, that's fantastic, because then a simile used well will really bring a scene to life and bring the moment to life. So that's a very good question. And yes, do it.
Okay, and it could be, I guess it could be linked to this next one, which is I've been reading a friend's manuscript and they keep stating things like a look of fear crosses Jan's face. How would you show that? That's
a very good question. And this is when I would say I'm not a writer, I'm an editor. But you know, faces are good. So you've got twitches, you've got ticks, you've got brows, you've got eyes widening. Now, again, you know, eyes widening is a bit of a cliche, but so a look of fear, what does somebody look like when they're frightened? What do they do? So, you know, think of what their face is actually doing and see if you can. And again, you might have to take 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 passes at it before you get the thing where you think, yes, that's it. That's what a face, that's what happens. This is what writing is. It's bloody murder. It's really hard. It's a nightmare. Writing is so difficult, and you can tell all your friends I said so. It's really, really hard. And you do need to just practice and practice and rewrite until yes, that is what somebody's face looks like. That's what somebody's face does when they're frightened. I mean, you might on the first pass, you know.
So Jennifer's question is, should you describe the physical looks of every character, and if so, when?
Ideally, yes, and ideally as soon as possible. I mean, we talked about this a bit in characterization. People are very doing it, and one of the reasons they don't want to do it is they say people will just make up how they look anyway. And when we were doing, and that's true, and when we were doing characterization, I did say that they will do that, but if you don't give a physical description and you say on page, you know, 120, he stroked his big red beard, and you'd picture this person looking, you know, like a short, dark person, it's going to be like the needle screeching off a record. So drop in subtle physical descriptions as soon, and, you know, the really good place to do this, either you could say, you know, if you're doing it through somebody else's eyes, you can say, you know, she was tall for a woman. Great, we know that, that's really good. And then when she's talking, you could say, you know, something. What I was going to say, a really good place to do this is the signifiers in the dialogue. So, I don't know, she said, brushing her dark hair away from her face. You know, great, that's building our picture. So do it as soon as you can. I mean, not instantly, but pretty soon after we've met somebody. Tell us what they look like, even the incidental characters, and it's true that then your readers will go off and just make it up anyway. But there's not going to be that screeching off the record moment when it turns out, you know, that she's obese and has got red hair. And that's another thing. Change it up a bit. You know, put some fat people when it's not the story. when it's not important to the story that somebody's fat, or not important to the story that somebody's got, you know, glasses, or not important to the story that somebody's got a moustache, chuck that in anyway, because people are all different. People look different. So give us a bit of variety in your characterization. But that was a whole other talk. But it does come back to description as well.
I know it. And the chat continues. I think we've got some suggestions for how to describe the look of fear on the face. And Marv's just dropped a link for a book that's excellent for searching for descriptions for emotions. So if you're not in chat, go on, Sal, sorry.
Use that stuff. It's not cheating. Use every resource you can. There's lots online for stuff like that. There are wheels. If you search online for a word wheel, you know, there are loads of them, and they're really, really useful. Go use those. Use every resource you can. It's absolutely not cheating.
Yeah.
Go for it. Do it. Recommend.
Say that again, sorry, Sal. I cut you off.
I said recommend the books. It's very good.
Yeah, so please do. I mean, we love the fact that this is kind of a forum for, you know, it's not just about asking Sally questions, but it's also sharing ideas. So it's great to see this happening in chat and in the meantime. Okay, would you consider historical fiction quite similar in many aspects as in writing a biography of someone during Victorian England regarding emotional description?
First of all, Tom, you sound a bit like a Dalek to me.
It might be. Sorry, is that better?
That's better. So I was slightly distracted. I'm sorry. You sounded like a Doctor Who monster. Can you give me the gist of that one more time? I do apologise.
Okay, so sorry about that. It happened once earlier today. I hope it's better now. Is that better?
But yes, you could have ruled the world. You could have that moment. Yeah, give it again.
Would you consider historical fiction quite similar in many aspects as in writing a biography of someone during Victorian England regarding emotional description?
If you're writing biography, you've got to be careful, because you can only presume, especially if it was that far back, what their emotions were. But of course, if you've got letters and diaries and stuff, you can go from that. I say with a biography, you've got to employ a slightly lighter touch. It's a whole separate genre. It's got its own rules. It's got its own things that people are expecting from it. Now, of course, rules are there to be broken, but if you break a rule, you've got to do it very well. Lighter touch with biography, even historical biography. Though, actually, I think I suddenly know what they're asking. So if you're describing where somebody lived, or, you know, the beach that they walked on or something, yes, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. Okay, let's have a look at this one. So Priscilla's asked, I'm writing my novel in third person that jumps point of view, and one of my characters is an 8-year-old boy. When using descriptions in a child's point of view, should I avoid using larger words that children wouldn't know?
100% you should, yes, if it's from his point of view. But it's very, I mean, I don't want to put you off, because you know, if you pull it off, it's going to be great, and why shouldn't you pull it off? But if you're doing something from a child's point of view, you've got two problems. One is doing what you just said, making them. I just had this exact problem on the last book I worked with. These 8-year-old, and they were 8 as well, were having, you know, discussions about, you know, male power and stuff. I don't think they were. No, they might have been, but not with those words. And the other thing is to infantilize children, so to make children sound and act much younger than they actually are. Now, you know, what you need to do is get yourself around some 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
To put it really simply, unless you can vividly remember that period in your own life, or unless you can remember that period in your child's life. And that for me is always very handy if I'm editing and a child is it doesn't sound right. I think, well, what was my daughter like at that age? And that's quite, you know, it's your built-in resource you have there. But those are the two things you have to be careful of. So yes, definitely be careful of giving them a vocabulary that they wouldn't have, and insights that they wouldn't have, and references that they couldn't possibly have either. Remember, they haven't read the books, they haven't seen the films.
Yep.
They,
yep. Great advice. Thank you. Alexander has asked, how can we describe intense emotions through smell and touch?
The way you describe intense emotions through smell and touch is when you are feeling something intensely, your emotions, everything's amplified, everything's heightened. And you will have noticed this yourself in moments of, if you get bad news, you know, you suddenly notice that the flowers in the vase are drooping. Everything becomes sort of almost psychedelic. If you are frightened and you're waiting for something, you know, sound sort of goes away. It's as if you're in a vacuum. So what you have to do is, and you know, smell is smell is a well known that smell can take you anywhere, back in time, to any moment, to anything. D.H. Lawrence wrote a whole short story about the smell of chrysanthemums. You know, you do it by bringing us into that moment and showing us how everything is sharpened and heightened or dulled. That's the other thing that can happen. If you're panicking, everything else goes away. Yeah. So if you're panicking, it's like tunnel vision. So that's how you can show us that. Think of yourself. Unfortunately, we've all been through stuff. Think of yourself in those moments, how you felt.
I find it interesting. I'm sure many of our listeners are the same, but after our conversation earlier in the week about description, it really changed. It didn't change, but it made me, when I then was reading the book I'm reading that evening, it made me kind of appreciate it all the more, how they just draw you into a great, you know, that's what I love about reading, just how the description draws me into the scene. I'm a very visual person, very kind of,
yeah.
So I should add at this point that in ProWritingAid, for those of you who aren't familiar with the tool, we have one of the 20 reports you can run on a manuscript is our sensory report, and that will analyze kind of which senses you're communicating with, you're communicating to. So it's well worth having a play with ProWritingAid to see what it can do and see how it can help with your description. Sal,
yes,
time is moving on. Is there anything that you feel we haven't covered? Anything that you wanted to highlight in you know, challenges of perfecting description?
I think we've had some very, very good questions on here that have pulled most out. No, all I want to highlight is you have to have some. As scared as you might be of it, or some people just plain don't want to. They just, you know, I'm not that kind of writer. It's not, you know, it's a story that's important. You know, this is what I do hear quite often. People can imagine that for themselves. Yeah, they can. The people can sit at home and imagine a story. They don't have to go to the cinema. If you are writing a book, give your reader as much help as you can give them, and give them, the reader, as much pleasure as you can give them, and then entertain them, because that's part of what reading is. So, you know, people who have this inclination, it's not really that important. People can imagine it. I've said it was raining. They can imagine all the rest of it. Sure, they can, but they're going to read somebody else's book probably. Yeah,
great. Okay, well, I think our time is nearly up. It's been a really interesting one. So we've had loads of questions. I think we've had time to answer about 17 questions tonight, which is great. I want to say a big thank you to our audience, our listeners and viewers tonight. We really like the interaction, and I particularly like what's happening in chat tonight. And I hope that lots of you are making kind of new contacts, if you like, and finding beta readers and other voices to help with your writing journeys. So I think with that, we'll end there tonight. Next month, I think we're going to try and redo Show Don't Tell next month, aren't we? So
Yeah. It was a Daleks convention last time, so we're gonna give it another go.
That's great. And Irene has just mentioned, thank you, that was excellent. Ketchup-tastic.
Hey, you heard it first. I'm patenting it, remember.
I don't think I can add anything more to that. Thank you all ever so much for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful day wherever you are, and we will see you again in a month.
It was fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Sally.